The Montreal Canadiens need to get this draft right. Not because they need another headline or because another prospect ranking win, but because the organization still has clear holes. They need a second line center, more right shot defense, and forwards who could bring offense but also bring bite. But they need forwards who can skate, forecheck, finish body checks, get under other players' skin, and still make plays. That's the balance. And that's the reason why this draft can't just be about highlights or numbers or analytics. It can't be just about point totals. And it can't be just about who looks dominant against weaker junior defending. The Canadiens have to ask harder questions. What translates? What survives the gaps close when the gaps close? What survives when the games get a little bit faster and when playoff hockey gets really nasty? That's why this draft is so readily important for the Montreal Canadiens. So let's talk some mock draft, folks. All of the Canadiens picks, Coach K style, and live. Hey, gang. Welcome to another edition of PuckTalk Montreal. Thank you, of course, for joining in. I am your beloved Coach K, or for better or for worse, Costa Populius. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of the mock draft, there are a couple of things that I want to talk about. First and foremost, the announcement this week, it's gone. Hockey Night in Canada on public television no longer exists. Okay. And what does that mean? Well, it means that Hockey Night in Canada was born back in 1934 by the CBC. The first broadcast, of course, that voice, iconic, the one of Foster Hewitt. It hit television and lasted 74 years. Of course, the last few with Sportsnet kind of dictating the pace to CBC. But at the end of the day, there was hockey on public television, right? And that was the most important things. It was the thing that galvanized us as a country here in Canada, whether you're Canadian or not, but especially when it came to people like my parents who were immigrants. Saturday night was when you took a part of Canadiana and you brought it into your living room. Doesn't matter what creed you were, color, race, religious beliefs, it didn't matter. There was one religion on Saturday nights, and that was Hockey Night in Canada. And for me personally, back in the day, it was me in the middle, my brother Peter on the left, my brother Mike on the right, lying down in the living room on the floor, of course, because my dad monopolized the couch. My mom knitting on the chair behind us, but the entire family was there. My sisters were there too, watching the game, my grandmother as well. I mean, my grandmother, poor thing, used to sit in her chair and her too knitting like my mom. And every time the Canadians would score, my brothers and I would get up and try to mess up her hair, all tight in a nice little bun, and we'd screw it up. And she'd get pissed and then laugh. But it was part of our ritual. And that's kind of what's missing now. Part of the ritual. It's gone. And so when you go back in time and you think about Foster Hewitt and Bob Cole, Harry Neal, Howie Meeker, Peter Puck, Danny Gallivan, Dick Irvin, Brian McFarland, Dave Hodge, Jim Hewson, Craig Simpson. Just the list of names that you can go through with Hockey Night in Canada. Iconic voices that became part of our daily lives. Gone. Now, you have to have a Sportsnet subscription. You got to pay money. So some of the elder statesmen, people that have helped build what we are today, our parents, our grandparents, they can't afford basic cable in some cases. What happens? Well, they can't watch anymore. And that's the sad part in all this. And while they'll still be able to listen to the games on radio, even that's going the way of the dodo. So, it's a sad state of affairs when you talk about Hockey Night in Canada. And maybe the Powder Blues were gone. I forgot to mention Dodd Whitman too. That's another name that we can't forget. But by and large, Hockey Night in Canada was part of the fabric of Canadian culture, and it's gone. Now it's on Sportsnet exclusively. And that to me it doesn't seem right. But then again, that's my opinion. Now, there's another thing that I want to get to, and this one relates a little bit more to the Montreal Canadiens than it does anything else. I came across something that really kind of it kind of got me going. Jeff Merrick and Greg Wyshynski discussed the idea of Mark Scheifele potentially becoming part of the Montreal Canadiens and fitting in if Winnipeg's situation changes in terms of the fact that, well, they're going to get rid of Connor Hellebuck supposedly. And, especially when, you're looking at the Jets core possibly starting to shift. In that discussion, they mentioned names like Jacob Fowler, Jakub Dobeš, and possibly Michael Hage going the way to the Jets in order to get Mark Scheifele. And that's where I stop the conversation. Because trading Fowler or Dobeš for Scheifele makes zero sense from a Montreal Canadiens team building perspective. Not because Scheifele isn't good. We know that he is. Of course, we hate him in Montreal for what he did to Jake Evans. But it doesn't fit because Montreal has built something that they haven't had in years. That's layers in goal. Montembeault, Dobeš, Fowler. Of course, Montembeault struggled last year, but you still get my point. That's not a problem for the Canadiens. It's an advantage. And if the Canadiens are going to move one goalie, logically, it's not going to be Fowler or Dobeš. It's going to be Montembeault. Why Fowler or Dobeš? That makes completely no sense. And God help me, it has to be clickbait for Merrick and Wyshynski. Right? Fowler is on an entry-level contract under $1 million, signs through 2027-28, and he's going to remain an RFA after that. Dobeš is still cheap too, at $965 through 26-27, and he's an RFA. All that matters in terms of cap control for the Montreal Canadiens. Because when you're trying to build a contender, cheap impact players aren't throw-ins. They're oxygen that lets you breathe. They let you afford to go out and get your second line center or your right shot defenseman. They help you survive mistakes, and they let you take swings for the long ball. And if the Montreal Canadiens trade one of those young goalies for a 33-year-old center making $8.5 million until 2030, 2031, that's not a rebuild move. It's complete impatience on the part of Kent Hughes. That's why Montembeault makes a little bit more sense, because with him, it's different. Montembeault makes $3.1 million and his contract expires after next season. He's a real NHL goalie. He's proven that he's got credibility and he can help a team stabilize the position, especially given the fact that, hey, Winnipeg is losing their number one goaltender. And if Winnipeg suddenly is worried about its crease like it is, then the name Montreal should put on the table is definitely Montembeault, not Fowler, not Dobeš. Because from Montreal's side of things, you're moving the older goalie with the shorter runway and protecting the two cost-controlled options. That's real asset management. That's maintaining, that's real asset management, and that's really maintaining your rebuild plan. And the cap math, well, think about it for a minute, okay? I've been going through cap numbers for the better part of the week, so I'm going a little loopy, but listen to this, okay? The NHL salary cap for next season is $104 million. It's going to go to $113.5 for 27-28. The Canadiens are currently at 93.2 on the cap, and that gives them roughly about $11 million in projected space. Scheifele carries an $8.5 million cap hit through 2030, 2031. So if Montreal simply adds Scheifele, they technically can fit him in, but it makes things tight really fast. Now, if you get rid of Montembeault going back the other way, you subtract $3.15 million. So the net add for Scheifele, at least for one season, would be $5.35 million. That would leave Montreal roughly about $5.6 million to be able to make other moves. And that's workable. Not easy, but definitely a workable number. If Winnipeg retains salary, even $1 million or $1.5 million, then for Montreal, that becomes a little bit cleaner as well. But if the deal is for Fowler or Dobeš instead, you only clear about $1 million. Now Scheifele suddenly costs you $7.5 million. That's the net add. That leaves Montreal much, much tighter. And worse than that, you lose the cheap goalie advantage, and that's a massive problem. Now, here's the only version of that particular deal that might work. Obviously, you throw in Montembeault, you throw in a first-round pick or a strong second-round pick, a prospect that's below the Hage, Fowler, Dobeš tier, and ideally, Winnipeg retains a little bit of salary. That's the conversation starter for Montreal. Not Hage, not Fowler, not Dobeš, not Bryce Pickford, not David Reinbacher. Because if the Winnipeg says we need your future center or your future goalie, then the answer is simple. You walk away. You just say no. The better alternative, that might be to actually trade Montembeault to Winnipeg as part of a separate goalie solution. Get an asset back. then use that asset for a different deal to get a younger center who fits the Canadiens' Caulfield, Safkowski, Demidov timeline a hell of a lot better. Because Scheifele might help you today, no question. But Montreal's not building for one good season. They're building for 5, 6, and 7 seasons and a bigger window. And if Scheifele's contract runs until he's deep into his 30s, that's a risk that the Canadiens can ill afford to take. So in this whole Scheifele bullshit, is he a good fit? Well, from a hockey side, it's very interesting. He gives Montreal high-end offense. He's got a chippy side to him. We know that. He takes pressure off Nick Suzuki. He creates a dangerous second wave. And if Suzuki handles the harder 200-foot matchups, then that allows Scheifele to only be deployed for more offensive reasons. That part completely makes total sense. But if Scheifele is as a rebuild fit, only at the right price, only if Montembeault is the goalie going out, only if the Canadiens protect Fowler, Dobish, and Hage, and only if the cap hit can be manageable properly. Because the Canadiens shouldn't be trading away future stability for present-day excitement. They should be using surplus to solve need. That's the difference. Montembeault plus assets, worth discussing. Dobish and Fowler, not a chance. And that's how a smart team stays disciplined while still looking for the right way to get better. Let me know what you think in the chat, by the way, because I know it's a subject that hasn't been broached yet very cleanly. And I know a lot of you people hate Mark Scheifele, me included. So if you think about it, go out, put it out there, and we can keep talking trade rumors. And we're definitely going to talk draft picks, because now we're going to get to the best part of this show, and that's going to be my mock draft. And before I get to it, let me tell you, I'm going to pat myself on the back. I'm really proud of myself because I took a lot of time with this. I announced it at the beginning of the week. I said I was going to do it, but I had done some homework prior to that. And I'm not a draft guy by any stretch. Okay. I am not a guy who's going to come out and say, you know what, you need to draft this guy. But I kind of took this as an assignment like I would in school, because I wanted to see if I could structure the draft differently than you would normally see. And the reason I did that simply is because this offseason is going to matter for the Canadiens. The draft matters, the trade market matters, free agency matters, and every decision the Montreal Canadiens make this summer has to move them closer to being a real playoff problem. Not just a nice young team anymore, or not just a team with a little bit of potential, but a team who can actually win really hard games. So I'm going to take this draft on with a little bit of, with a grain of salt. And now I know a lot of people are talking about the Canadiens taking Pierre Dagenet's son Maddox as the 28th pick. And on paper, that pick makes a little bit of sense. Big body, offensive production, center/winger, local kid that plays in the queue, potential middle six upside. But when you look a little bit deeper, and this is where I go with this, right? Because I say this every year, I say this all the time, and I need people to understand. When you take a guy like Maddox Dagenet and you factor in the QMJHL environment, the quality of defending, and the way some of those highlights look, then there's a fair question to be asked. If the offense really going to translate? Is the space going to be there at the next level? Is he going to be beating defenders because he's projectable, or because the defending is giving him too much room? It doesn't mean that Dagenet is a bad prospect. Not at all. But at the 28th pick for the Montreal Canadiens, with this specific need, I want clear projection. I want a center who plays the game that fits playoff hockey. I want compete. I want pace. I want forecheck value, and I want middle lane habits. And I want a player who doesn't need perfect offensive conditions to matter. That's where I worry about guys coming out of the queue. I worried about Joshua Roy, and you see where Joshua Roy is in his development. Way behind where the learning curve should be in his case. So today we're going to look through every Canadiens pick. Number 28, 61, 93, 103, 125, 189, 221, and number 224. 8 picks, 1 targeted draft, and the mission is very clear for Montreal in this draft. It's not going to be something that they're going to add to their roster right away, but it's something that they need to do because they haven't had layers of this in years. Find a center. Add a right shot defense. Build a nastier, more competitive, more offensive, useful bottom six. That's where this draft has to go. So let's get into it. With pick number 28 in the 2026 entry draft, I think the Montreal Canadiens should select Jack Hextall. He's a center from the Youngstown Phantoms of the USHL. Now, I'm drafting transition. I'm also drafting playoff habits, and I'm drafting a center who can become useful when the game gets tighter. And that's why I prefer Hextall in this spot, because Hextall gives the Canadiens a very important profile. He's a right shot center, very competitive, a player who can pressure defenders, who can create chaos on the forecheck, who can play through traffic, and who doesn't need the game to be wide open to have value. That's the part that matters most. That's why I'm drafting this guy at center, because Montreal doesn't need another skilled forward. We've got enough of them, right? We've still got Zorowski coming in. Demidov is continuing to develop. They need a center who can eventually stabilize the lineup. They need someone who can play behind Nick Suzuki, who doesn't cost $6 or $7 million until later on in his contract. They need someone who could give this organization another option down the middle. And I know what some people are going to say, Coach, is Hextall a guaranteed second line center? Nothing's guaranteed in a draft. Nobody is handing you a second line center guaranteed. But you're looking for a path, and Hextall has that path. He has the bloodline. He has the competitiveness. He has the right shot advantage. He's got a very strong development route, and he plays the type of game that can translate for the Canadiens. That's the key word here, translate. Because in junior hockey, space can lie to you. Highlights can lie to you, and points totals can lie to you. But habits, that's usually where you see the truth in what a player is. Because any player can turn around and create a highlight package that makes them look good. The question is, when a scout's sitting in the crowd, is that where you're going to look your best when you don't have the puck on your stick and when you're playing away from the game? So that's where you ask yourself the question, does the player support the puck? Does he win races? Does he win battles? Does he make smart plays under pressure? Does he compete when he doesn't have the puck? Does he create problems for the opponent? That's where Hextall becomes very interesting, because he gives you a center with bite. And for Montreal, that's exactly what they're looking for. Because the Canadiens are trying to become harder to play against, right? They're not necessarily looking for a guy with no skill, but they're trying to become a team that can handle Tampa and Carolina and handle Florida, and specifically handle teams that make every inch of ice expensive. You don't beat those teams with highlight reel hockey alone. You beat those teams with players who can win ugly shifts. And from what I've seen, he has that in his game. And the Michigan State path matters too, because you know that program is fantastic. So there's no need to rush him. Let him go to college. Let him build strength. Next season, we're probably going to have Michael Hage coming in to add center depth. So he's going to be able to have time to mature. Let him refine his offensive side. Let him become more complete. And if it hits, if you can have a right shot middle six center who plays with an edge, that's extremely valuable and a rare profile to have in your organization. So at 28, if the Canadiens keep that pick, then I think that's the swing that's worth taking. Now, if Hextall's gone, then I think the Canadiens have a couple of other picks that they can look at, like Ilya Morozov, Seamus, I'm going to get this name wrong, Ignatavicius, of course, Maddox Dagenet, Oliver Suvanto, Mathis Preston. Morozov is the home run swing if somehow he slides. Ignatavicius gives you a bigger protested center profile. Dagenet, of course, is still an option if Montreal believes the offensive upside translates. Suvanto gives you a heavier center with size, and Preston gives you a competitive two-way center option. But through all of those guys, for me, the pick is clear, and it's got to be Jack Hextall, because Montreal needs a center, but it doesn't need just any center. It needs one whose game can survive tighter checking. And Hextall, from what I've seen, gives them that. Now, with the 61 pick overall, this is where the Canadiens need to address the right side of the blue line. And that pick for Montreal, I think they should select Goodmunson. Man, I never get names right. Right shot defenseman, Farjestad. This pick is about, above all else, organizational balance, because the Canadiens have some interesting right shot defensemen already in the pipeline. Of course, David Reinbacher is the obvious one. Bryce Pickford is coming. There are other names in the system too. Let's not act like this position is solved, because it's not. The right side still needs more depth, and you're not going to get all of it through the free agent market or via trade. You need more competition on the right side. You need more layers, and you absolutely need more options. And that's the reason why this matters so much. It's simple. Right shot defensemen are a very rare commodity, and they're expensive. They're expensive in trades. They're expensive in free agency. Just take a look at what happened. It's in the chat, and I'm going to mention it. The price that Radish went for to the Toronto Maple Leafs. 8 years, $8.5 million. That's not chump change for a guy who's had one successful season. And guys that are right shot defensemen are very expensive at the deadline. And if you don't draft them, eventually you have to overpay for them. And that's just bad asset management. So at 61, if Mans Goodmanson is there, you take him. He gives you size. He gives you a right-handed shot. He gives you a defender with puck moving projection in his game. And that's exactly the profile that Montreal is trying to add. Because the modern NHL doesn't always allow defensemen to be just one-dimensional. You can't just be just big or safe or just chip pucks off the glass. You need to be able to defend. You have to retrieve, escape pressure. You need to be able to make a good first pass. And you have to help your team move north. Goodmanson has enough in his profile to make sense. He's certainly not a finished product, and that's fine. That's not what you get in the draft. Second round picks are never finished products. The question is, do you see an NHL pathway? And for me, with Goodmanson, the answer to that is yes. You could see a third pair right shot defender who can move pucks, kill plays, and give you minutes down the road. That's really valuable. And for Montreal, it fits in perfectly. Because after Hextall at 28, you've addressed your center. Now you can address your blue line. That's how you build a targeted draft. Not random or reactionary, but targeted. Some other picks that you might get at 61, if Goodmanson is gone, well, then the Canadiens should look at Samu Alaluri, Brett Liskey, and Luke Scherer. Man, I can't pronounce names for shit. I apologize. Those would be the other right shot D names that I would keep on the board. Alaluri gives you mobility and intelligence. Liskey gives you size and defensive projection. And Scherer gives you a long-term right shot development bet. But Goodmanson is the guy who is my preferred pick because he fits the exact need. Right shot, size, puck movement, NHL pathway. That's a strong second round fit for me. Now we go to pick number 93, and this is where I want the Canadiens to start targeting forwards with offense and edge. The pick? Brady Waslin, forward, London Knights. This is where the Canadiens have to think about future bottom six identity. And let me be clear here. When I say bottom six, I don't mean low-skill grinders. That's the version of hockey that's gone. We no longer see that anymore. You can't build a fourth line full of players who can only hit. You can't build a third line full of players who can just dump the puck in and survive. The best teams have depth who can play. They can skate, pressure, produce, force turnovers, and they can irritate opponents. And they can finish when they have chances that are there. That's the profile Montreal needs more of, and Waslin fits the idea. He comes from London. That matters. You know the Hunter brothers in London develop players in a winning environment. They get coached hard. They play meaningful games. They learn pro-style structure, pro-style details, and they learn how to play as part of a machine. That's not guaranteeing anything, but it's something that you have to look at because it certainly helps. Waslin gives you pace. He gives you some offensive value, and above all else, he gives you compete. And he also gives you a player who can become really annoying and be an energetic winger with enough skill to really matter. That's the kind of middle round forward I like. Because if you're drafting into the third round, you want a player with a role, but you want a player with an upside inside of that role. You don't want a player who's just safe. Safe doesn't move the organization forward, right? Montreal needs players who can eventually pressure the NHL roster. Waslin could possibly do that. Maybe not right away, but down the road. And if he develops properly, he has the kind of game that becomes useful in a playoff-style bottom six. A winger who can skate, forecheck, create turnovers, chip in offense, and makes opponents uncomfortable. That's valuable. Some alternatives in 93, if Waslin is gone, well, then you've got guys like Blake Zielinski, Jean-Christophe Lemieux, Eric Jardine, and Axel Ellefson. Zielinski gives you a forward again, with skill and pace. Lemieux gives you compete at a local angle too. Jardine gives you another useful forward profile, and Olofsson gives you a toolsy option with upside. But for me, 93, your pick is Waslin because he gives Montreal what they need more of: skill with bite, pace with competitiveness, offense with pressure. That's the blend that you should be looking for, especially in the later rounds. Now we move on to pick number 103. Are you guys getting tired yet? Because this is an extra fourth rounder for the Canadiens, right? This is where I double down on right shot defense. And for me, the pick there is Jaden Kurtz. Right shot defenseman, Chicago Steel. Now, some people might say, Coach, you already have a right shot defenseman at 61. Why take another one at 103? Simple, because one's not enough. That's why. One pick doesn't fix a position. One prospect doesn't create organizational depth. And one pick doesn't solve the right side for the next decade. Okay? You need volume. You need competition. And you need different development timelines, and you need options. And above all else, even if you do draft a defenseman, another one anyway, the thing about defensemen is very simple. They develop slower than any other player that you have in your organization. I've never been able to really put my finger on why, but it's just the truth. We always see defensemen come into the league that struggle maybe a year or two, and then all of a sudden when year 3 and year 4 rolls around, suddenly it clicks for him. That's why you make this pick. That's how good organizations build. You don't wait until you have the problem and then end up having to overpay and panic. You draft ahead of the problem. The Canadiens know they have this, right? So you develop ahead of the problem too. You create options before you become desperate. That's what this pick is all about. Kurtz gives Montreal size, a right shot, and it gives them long-term defensive projects, right? At 103, that makes sense. You know this isn't a guarantee. You're not looking for the perfect player in the fourth round, but you're looking for certain traits, and you're looking for something worth investing in. And Kurtz has that for you. He doesn't need to be rushed. He doesn't need to be forced into a timeline, but he can be allowed to develop, build strength, and refine his defensive details. He can also grow into the profile that you want. And if it works, then Montreal has another right shot defender in its pipeline. And that's exactly my point. Because the Canadiens can't just assume that every right shot prospect is going to hit. That's how teams get exposed, right? You need redundancy, you need insurance, and you need competition. Kurtz gives you that. And that's the reason why, for the Canadiens, I would go out and pick him. Now, moving on. At pick number 125, I take Alex Kostov. This is one of my favorite type of swings in this case, okay? Because he's a right winger from the Flint Firebirds. You thought maybe he was from Russia, right, guys? But no. He's a kid from the OHL. And this is the size offense pick, and that combination really matters for me. Because I don't want Montreal drafting size just to draft size. We've seen how that's worked out with guys like Michael McCarron, for example. Although now, in the later years, McCarron has turned out to be a very good and useful player. But early on, he wasn't anything like what the Canadiens needed. It's how you end up with a player who looks like he's good at getting off the bus, but doesn't impact the game at all. I want size with skill, with finishing ability, and I want size with some offensive imagination. Size that can become difficult to play against, and that is Kozlov. He's a big winger. He's got a scoring touch. He has a frame that gives him a chance to become a very heavy player in the future. And if the skating continues to improve as it has, if the pace keeps coming, the details sharpen, and then the player that you want is right there. Maybe not a top 6 player, but potentially a heavy third line winger. And the Canadiens need those. We admit that all the time. He's a player that can get to the net, protect pucks, win board battles, make defenders uncomfortable, and still finish chances from the tight areas near the front of the net. That's the kind of player Montreal should be looking for in this range. Because the Canadiens have skill in the system, as I've mentioned before. But what they need is more hard skill. They need more players who can play through resistance. They need more forwards who don't disappear when the game gets heavy. Kostov gives you that type of possibility. And again, it's the fourth round. You're not drafting certainty. But what you're drafting here is a tool package. And Kostov's tool package fits the profile. Big winger, scoring touch, power forward projection, worth the swing. And when you look at Kostov, if he's gone, then you've got a couple of small alternatives that you can go to. Guys like Zach Lansard, Spencer Bowes, Cole Zurowski, and Kalen Judry. Man, I can't pronounce names. Lansard gives you energy and competitiveness. Bowes is one of those hard forward type of profiles that he gives you. Zurowski gives you size and goal scoring, and Judry gives you another big frame with a big development swing, a little bit longer than Kostov's. But for me, Kostov's the target because he gives you size and offense together, and that's the key here for Montreal. Not just big, not just skilled, but both. And that's what Montreal needs a hell of a lot more of. Now, the Canadiens don't have a fifth round pick. We have to go all the way down to the sixth round at pick number 189. And this is where Montreal can hop back to maybe getting another center. The pick. Oops, I missed the button. Carter Stevens, center, the Guelph Storm. Another kid from the OHL. And this isn't a flashy pick. It's not a name that's going to dominate draft day conversation. But it's a pick that's going to matter because organizational depth is not built with only first round picks. It's built through volume and patience. It's built through identifying traits late in the draft. And Stevens gives you traits worth betting on. He plays center. He has size. He has some finishing ability. And he gives the Canadiens another middle lane development project. All those things matter. Because even after taking Hextall at 28, the Canadiens should not stop drafting centers. You can never have too many of them. We've learned that the hard way through decades of hardship with Montreal. And the thing about centers is you can always move a guy to the wing. You can create depth players with them, and centers become trade pieces. They can become flexibility, and the Canadiens need a hell of a lot more than that. The key with Stevens is very simple, though. Don't expect him to become a star. That's not the point. The point is there as a bottom six pathway into the league. Can he keep improving? Can he become harder to play against? Can he round out the defensive side? Can his size, can he use his size better than he already does? Can he become a useful depth center down the road? Those are all questions you need to ask. That's what you're betting on here at pick number 189. And that's a reasonable bet. Then you move forward to pick number 221, right? And now these are the last two for the Canadiens because this late in the draft, seventh round, you're not expecting much, but you still keep swinging no matter what. And for me, the Canadiens should select Cole Zurowski, right winger, Owen Sound attack. Notice how I keep going back to the OHL when it comes to forwards? There's a reason for that. They seem to come out with forwards that play really, really well in that league. And they fit the profile that the Canadiens need more than anything. And with Zurowski, it's simple late round philosophy. Take a player with something. Don't draft bland and don't draft safe. And don't draft a player just because he's responsible. In the seventh round, you need a trait, something that's going to draw you towards the player. Zurowski gives you size. He gives you a little bit of goal scoring production. He gives you a winger profile that can be developed. And that's enough for me to make him interesting in terms of drafting. If you're Montreal, you need more big wingers pushing up from underneath. You need more players who can eventually challenge the bottom six roles in the lineup. You need players who could bring more than just energy. Energy is good, but energy without skill has a ceiling. You need players who can actually hurt opponents on the scoreboard. Zurowski gives you a chance at that. Is he a lock in the seventh round? Never. You're not looking for guarantees in the seventh round. What you're looking for is a reason to believe in a player. And with Zurowski, the reason is the combination of size and scoring. It's worth a seventh round pick. And that's where I target this. And now, with the next pick, we close out the draft. Pick number 224. What the Canadiens should select, for me, is Kalen Judry. Forward, Wenatchee Wild. Say that 3 times fast. This is another size and tool swing for me. And you can see where my whole path is going here. I like ending the draft this way because at this point, I'm not drafting polish. You're drafting a possible identity. Judry gives you a frame. He gives you projectability. And he gives you a player who can become a forecheck piece if his development hits. And that fits the overall theme of this draft for me. My theme's been simple, right? Forwards with size, forwards with skill, forwards that are a little bit nastier. Montreal needs more forwards who can become difficult to play against, right? That's the whole point. Not just skilled, not just gritty, but both. Because playoff teams that last, they have depth players who make opponents pay. We just saw that with Carolina. They finish checks, they pressure pucks nonstop, they go to the net, they win wall battles, and they turn nothing shifts into momentum shifts. That's what Montreal should be trying to build here. Judry doesn't guarantee anything. He doesn't guarantee that he's going to be an NHL player, but he gives you a frame and a pathway. And in the seventh round, that's all you can ask for. A player who might become something specific. A big forward that can forecheck, a guy with bottom six development possibilities, and a player who can add more physical identity to the organization. And that, for me, is a worthwhile final pick. So let's get back to the draft order and run through everybody one more time. Pick number 28, Jack Hextall. Right shot, competitive, forecheck value, middle six projection, a better translation bet than, say, a Maddox Dagenet from the Q. Pick number 61, Mans Gudmundsson. Right shot defenseman with size, a puck moving projector, and a needed addition to the right side of the defense for Montreal. And number 93, Braden Wasslin. Forward, skilled, pace, compete, and a possible energetic, annoying, useful bottom six winger. At 103, Jaden Kurtz, another right shot defenseman, because one right shot D in a draft isn't enough for any team. At 125, Alex Kostov, a big scoring winger, power forward traits, a heavy offensive profile worth developing. At pick number 189, Carter Stevens, center, size, depth projection, another middle lane swing for the Montreal Canadiens. At pick number 221, Cole Zarowski, right wing, size, and goal scoring. A late round trait bet that, it's swing or miss when you got to the seventh round. And the last one, Kalen Judry, big forward, forecheck projection, bottom six identity swing. That gives Montreal in this draft as a total 2 centers, 2 right shot defensemen, and 4 forwards with a combination of size, offense, compete, and edge. That's the point. This whole draft that I gave you has a specific theme. Center value, right shot defense, hard skill. That's exactly what the Montreal Canadiens need. And now you're going to ask me the question, why am I picking Hextall over Dagenet? Because if Dagenet is the pick, the logic was offense and upside. And there's nothing wrong with that. But Hextall changes the whole of this entire class because it makes it more translatable, more identity driven. And it gives the Canadiens a center who fits the type of team they're trying to become. A team that can skate, forecheck, play through contact, and win playoff style shifts. That's where Hextall makes more sense because Montreal can't just build for October. They have to build for April and May, and they have to build for games where they have no space, where the neutral zone gets clogged up, where defenders close fast, and every puck battle matters. In those games, you need players with habits, pace, with real bite, and you need centers who can handle all of that responsibility. That bet for me is on Hextall. He may not be the flashiest offensive player available, but he may be the better Canadiens pick because the Canadiens don't need to win a highlight contest. They need to build a team. And that's really different. Now, here's my takeaway in all of this. I'm a fan, right? First and foremost, got to say that, right? Although I have coached hockey for a long time, I'm still a fan. But I'm going to tell you this. Don't make the mistake when you're looking at the draft of falling in love with the highlight package. Fall in love with what the player can translate to. That's how you draft properly. And I've done this in junior a few times now. Okay, a player can dominate in junior, right? In my case, players dominate at the lower levels, whether it's bantam or midget. And you can look great with open ice, and you can put up points, and you can make defenders look bad. But the NHL is a league that asks you a completely different question when it comes to that. Can you do it when there's no space? Can you do it when there's a defender already on your ass? Can you do it when the puck has to move here and now? Or when the game gets very physical? Can you do it when the other team is hunting your mistakes? That's why I'm more comfortable with a guy like Hextall at 28. Because the Canadiens need more players who can play in the hard areas. They need players who can win ugly. We asked for that all playoffs long. The Canadiens couldn't provide it. They need players who can become playoff pieces. And when you combine Hextall with the rest of this draft, then you have a class with a purpose. Hextall gives you the swing at center. Gudmundsson and Kurtz give you the right shot defensive depth. Waslin, Kostov, and Zorowski and Joudry, give you hard skill forward swings. And Stevens gives you another project at center. That's a balanced class for me. It's intentional. And it's a draft built around what Montreal actually needs. There are a lot of teams that will go out there and say they need to draft the best player available. In my mind, and I've said this a million times over the years, whether I was talking to friends like Jimmy, who dropped $10 in the chat, and thank you, Jimmy, or whether or not it was somebody else. The thing about the draft is simple to me. It's fine to say you need to draft the best player available. But in my mind, if I were the GM of the Montreal Canadiens, my first order of business would be to draft the best player available for organizational needs. If I don't do that, then I'm doing my organization a disservice. It's nice to accumulate pieces over the years through the draft. But if they don't fit and all you're doing is drafting capital, you're betting on other teams needing to get rid of what you actually need. And that's not a good way to run an organization, in my mind anyway. So if I'm sitting at the Canadiens draft table, my plan is this. 28 is Hextall because I don't think Maddox Dagenet has what it takes for the NHL. Not because he's a bad player, but because Hextall is a cleaner fit in terms of the translation bet. Right shot center, forecheck driver, competitive piece. 61, again, Mads Gudmundsson, because the right side of the defense needs more depth. 93, I take Brady Wasilin because my bottom six needs more skill and bite. Then comes Jaden Kurtz because I double down on right shot D. Alex Kostov because big wingers with scoring touch are worth betting on. Carter Stevens because centers always matter. And Cole Zorowski and Kalen Joudry because in the 7th round, you bet on tools more than anything else. That's the class that I select. That's my strategy. It might be wrong. Tell me what you think in terms of strategically. But that's how Montreal should attack this draft from my perspective. Not by chasing the big names or the highlights, but by building towards the team that wants to become better, right? And what you want your team to become. A team with center depth, a team with right shot depth at defense, a team with skill, edge, that doesn't get pushed around easy, and that can survive playoff hockey. That's my goal if I'm the GM of the Habs. And if my draft gives me one middle six center, one right shot NHL defenseman, and one hard skilled bottom six winger, then as the GM of the Habs, I've done my job. That's how you build. Then you have to develop, and that's how the Canadiens keep moving from being promising to extremely dangerous. So now it's your turn. Put it in the chat, and if you're watching this afterwards, put it in the comments. If you're the Montreal Canadiens, are you still taking Maddox Dagenet because he's the local kid and because he fits in terms of offensive production? Or are you like me picking Jack Hextall? Or are you going in a completely different direction? Are you drafting like me where you're looking for size, skill, and ruggedness? Drop your pick in the comments. Make sure, as always, like the video, subscribe to PuckTalk Montreal. And now we shift from the talking points that we've gone through here in terms of the draft to the live chat. And the live chat actually started a bit early. It started way before I started the show. And it started with Bob Habs, who also dropped $4.99 in the live chat. Thank you for that, Bob Habs. And he, of course, jokes, trade Line to the Leafs for first overall. Because after what they did in terms of going out and getting Darren Radish and for a 5th round pick, which in and of itself would have been a decent trade just to get his rights, but 8 years at $8.5 million, as Absolutely Hockey says, you got to be nuts. And I had this talk again with my buddy Jimmy, who is down there in the live chat down at the bottom, having, like I said, donated $10. Jimmy calls me every day, almost, especially during this time of year, because you never know what's going to happen. And you can ask him, guys. I hit more than I miss when I tell him shit. And he freaks out about it. But anyway, I digress. But the thing about going out and getting a guy like Radish, even if it were the Montreal Canadiens, because I know a lot of people would say that the Canadiens should have taken a shot at Radish. And you're probably right. But here's the thing. Where is your priority? Is your priority right shot defense or is your priority center? For me, right shot defense already has a little bit of a pathway because I could afford to wait a little bit because I've still got David Reinbacher. I've got Bryce Pickford joining the Rocket next season. I've got options. I still have Carrier. You know, there are things that I can do on the right side for now, but that doesn't mean I don't address it. But when you look at Radish and you look at his numbers, and, you know, I didn't go out and go get anything in terms of Hockey TV because I wasn't planning on talking about Radish, but the thing about Radish is he's only had 1 year where he's really mattered in Tampa, and that's this season. And if you're going to ask yourself why, for me, it's pretty simple. For the majority of the season, there was one person missing on the blue line, and that's Victor Hedman for Tampa. So Radish was getting more minutes because he was getting more puck touches. Automatically, when you do that and you're playing with a guy like Nikita Kucherov, you're going to end up with more points. It's an automatic. So be it as it may, I wouldn't be a guy taking a shot at him. Now, I also brought up, as we were talking earlier before the show started, the name of Pavel Zacha. And that absolutely says, yeah, he'd be an ideal candidate at center for Montreal. But that brings back the whole debate when we were talking about Dylan Larkin. Now we're talking about Pavel Zacha. And the fact that both those guys are in the Montreal Canadiens division. Now, granted, I don't think Dylan Larkin wants to leave the U.S. I think he wants to stay in the U.S. and play there, which is fine. It's his prerogative. He's got a no move. Do what you want. When it comes to Pavel Zacha, though, I think his choice is a little bit more liberal. So would Zacha be a good fit for Montreal? We said this last year. He'd be ideal. He's a guy that put up points. He can play hard minutes. He plays a physical game. He can get to the front of the net. All the things that Montreal needs in the second line center. So if he's available, it's a talk that the Montreal Canadiens need to have with Boston. Now, the question is simple. Would the Boston Bruins still be interested in trading for a guy like Jaden Struble? Because that's who the Boston Bruins have their eye on. A kid that played in Providence, or from Providence, I can't remember. But it's what you think about, right? So those are all things that you look at. Let's see here. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to pay a guy who's 30 years old, 8 years, $8.5 million. That's my whole promise here with Scheifele too, because at the end of Scheifele's contract, he's going to be somewhere around that age too. So I'm not interested in keeping Scheifele until 2030, 2031. So I'm not taking that one either. But yeah, I wouldn't sign him for that long. That's crazy. It sucks that Hockey Night in Canada is gone. It's messed up to people have to pay for subscriptions. That's totally true with anything that you do. Nowadays, if you look at it, all we do is pay for subscriptions, whether it's streaming, you're talking about Netflix, Crave, in Canada anyway. What are we looking at? Amazon Prime Video, all types of different services that we pay for. Discovery Plus, Paramount Plus, Disney Plus. It's all plus, plus, plus. Why? Because it's plus out of our pockets. But yeah, it's a sad day when it comes to Hockey Night in Canada. No doubt about it. You know, I remember having, and I've got a picture of it somewhere that I need to put up. But when I was with Montreal Hockey Talk, and we used to do live broadcasts from the Cummings Center for Seniors when they first started the Sports Celebrity Breakfast again. And for years prior to that, Dick Irvin was the host of the Sports Celebrity Breakfast. But when it came back, they invited Dick Irvin. And Dick Irvin was kind enough to sit in on our show. And when it comes to Dick Irvin, you don't have to do much in terms of talking. All you got to do is put a mic in front of him, ask him one question, and he can tell you stories till the cows come home. And that's the beauty of guys that were of the ilk of Dick Irvin. It's about the storytelling. You don't get that anymore when it comes to hockey broadcasts. Tell me, right? You get somebody's own experiences in terms of how the game translated for them, whether it's a guy like Kelly Rudy or Kevin Bieksa, who I happen to like, by the way. But you get all these guys that talk about the game of hockey through their own eyes. But the thing about Dick Irvin is not only did he talk about it through his own eyes, but through every player that he ever talked to, he was able to translate the game through their eyes. And that's the uniqueness of his ability to tell stories. It's the same with a guy like Dave Stubbs, the NHL historian, right? Used to write for the Montreal Gazette. Or even a guy like Michael Farber. Anytime they write something, whether it's a video expose or whether it's something in print, it's beautiful. It's articulate. You know, you can throw Stephen Brunt into that group as well. It's a story. And that's the part that's missing from the game of hockey now, the storytelling. It's okay to be analytic. It's okay to be able to, describe what's going on the ice. But you need to be able to tell a story sometimes when it comes to that kind of stuff. And that's the part that's missing. Vlog Habs, you're right. No Hockey Night in Canada on CBC is a travesty. Victor Maxwell channel. Don't think I've seen you on the chat before, Victor, so welcome. Hockey Night in Canada, pretty sad. What about keeping Evans as number 2 center and looking for a number 3 center? Evans is a good stopgap, Jim. I think anyway. But he's not that skill guy that you need to be able to take the pressure away from a guy like Suzuki. I mean, you can put him in there in case of injury, like the Canadiens did, right? But when you think about it, Evans doesn't bring you the dangerous offensive center that you need to take away the pressure from Suzuki. Guys don't worry about Evans, and that's the part that you need to get as your second line center. Will they worry about a guy like Scheifele? Yeah, for sure. Zaka, for sure. Anybody the Canadiens get in the group that we've talked about already through the shows this week, whether it's McTavish, Trocheck, Barzal, or Hischier, anybody in that type of player is somebody that's going to draw attention away from Nick Suzuki. That's what you're looking for. Because if you draw attention away from Suzuki, then you're drawing attention away from Cole Caulfield, drawing it away from Slafkovsky, and suddenly you're becoming a much more dangerous team because you have layers in your offense. Evans, unfortunately, as much as I love the guy, he doesn't bring that. But as a third line center, I keep him all day, every day, because he fills that particular need. Could he be a little bit bigger for my liking? Sure. But my centers don't necessarily have to play along the half wall. Let's see here. Hischier most likely resigning in New Jersey. That is almost a fait accompli, guys. But you can talk about Hischier because, one, he needs to extend. And if New Jersey doesn't want to pay him, then that's another story altogether. Then he becomes expendable. Then he forces Jersey to have to move him. That's when Montreal slips in and says, guys, what do you want for him? And you have the conversation. Doesn't mean the Canadiens can get him or that they have enough capital in their lineup to be able to go out and get him. But Hischier would be the perfect player to get to be able to support Nick Suzuki, without a doubt, in my mind anyway. Yep. Everybody hates Mark Scheifele because Scheifele always, whenever he does something on the ice, whether it was the Evans hit or anything else, he gives you that look like, what? I didn't do anything. Although, he's one of the dirtiest players in the game, but that's just me. Go for best player available, not positional need. I hate that thinking, absolutely. I'm telling you. I hate it because you don't get anywhere with it. Sure, you build capital organizationally, but you're screwed. What exactly are you doing afterwards? Okay? If you go out and you keep drafting wingers nonstop, okay? The best skilled guy, the best skilled guy, the best skilled guy. What happens when he doesn't have the size that you need? What happens if he's got the skill set, but he can't play the physical game that you saw from the Carolina Hurricanes? Those guys are easy to find. Granted, there's a lot of them, but you need to have them. The Canadiens don't have enough of them. That's why I'm drafting them. Let the other teams build skill. I don't give a rat's ass. We've already done that part over the last 4.5 years. We've built skill into our lineup. We've added players that make the Canadiens dangerous when there's open ice. But when there's none there, It has to be a combination of best player available for organizational need. It can't be just always the best player because you'll never fill in the gaps in your organization. If you take the time, okay, and you go out and you draft a skill, and then you take the time and you go out and you draft for organizational need, and you get those heavy wingers with offensive skill, guys that can shut down the game, guys that can be able to play those hard minutes in the playoffs. You get those guys in your organization and you have a level playing field, then yeah, go out and get the best player available. I don't care. But when you don't have them, you need to go out and get what you need, period. But again, I might be wrong. But that's the way I think anyway. Yowzers makes sense though. And Vinny Trocheck. Yeah. Trocheck, absolutely. But again, the Rangers are going to look to hit a home run with Trocheck if they deal him. So that's the part that you have to watch, right? If there's one thing that Chris Drury has done over the years in New York is he screwed up all the work that Jeff Gordon had done prior to him getting there. Okay. So Drury's got to make up for some of the shit that he's done. So, I mean, Trocheck, he's got a homer. And in order to homer, he's got to ask for the moon and the stars when it comes to that trade. So we'll see what happens. Joe the Snoop from Down Under. I could see the first round pick getting traded. I could too. Okay. That goes without saying. I could see that happening. But right now, for the purpose of the mock draft, the 28th pick is still there. Does it get traded before Friday next week? Well, it's Friday, right? The 26th? Yeah. If it does, great. If it doesn't, then the Canadiens take 28th. So when you're doing a mock draft like this, you'll deal with certainties, not with the fact that it's getting moved. But I would agree with you. To me, I see the first round pick getting traded too. But we'll see. For who? Hopefully for somebody of substance. But we'll see. Vogcab, daydream that Robert Thomas is a possibility. Thomas is off the table. St. Louis tried. Didn't happen. He's off. He's not available. Done deal. Okay. We'll see if anything else comes out, but he's done. But if Thomas is available, again, St. Louis is another team who's going to look to hit a homer when it comes to Thomas. They're going to want to get back a lot of value, multiple first round picks, maybe a goaltender. Again, the Canadiens were looking to move Sam Montembeault at the deadline last year. There was talk that they were talking possibly about Jordan Binnington. That would have been a move that would have made everybody happy? Probably not, because then it wouldn't have allowed Jakub Dobeš to emerge as such a good goaltender. But that's where the Canadiens were looking at when they were talking to St. Louis. It wasn't all about Robert Thomas. Did they inquire? Absolutely. They also inquired about Jordan Kyrou. Is that going to happen? Time will tell. We don't know who's going to be available from today to tomorrow. But right now, Thomas isn't. Kyrou's not on the table either. But we'll see what St. Louis decides to do. Dagen is a good choice, but he's going top 23. I don't think he's going top 23. I mean, there are people that are projecting him there, right? But the thing about guys from the queue, and I talk about this all the time, is they're over-evaluated because the quality of the game in the queue is nowhere near as good as the OHL or the Western Hockey League. Everybody has to begin to admit that before we can move forward. If the queue decides to start developing quality defensemen, goaltenders, and rounding out the way the game looks, then fine. But the problem with the queue is that the teams in that league are more interested in creating offensive opportunities for their players and thus putting more asses in the seats for their owners to make more money. It's as simple as that. It's gotten away from player development in a big way. While in the Ontario Hockey League and the Western Hockey League, they still get asses in the seats. Why? Well, because the hockey is just that good. Doesn't matter what town you're in, right? So be it as it may, I'm not interested in terms of Dagenet. He's a good player, don't get me wrong, and he's got potential. But show me that potential versus some quality opposition as opposed to wide open ice. I looked at his highlight package. A lot of his points were second and third, second chance assists and assists that were built on other guys' goals. Can he put the puck in the net? Sure. He's got his father's hands. But in terms of a guy who can create offense at center, it's not him. Because again, like I said, secondary assists off shots that he takes, is not creating offense, in my mind anyway. And it's not the type of skill that's going to take away from Nick Suzuki. Fun fact, Jack Hextall is a distant relative of Ron Hextall. Jack's father is a cousin of the longtime goaltender and executive. Exactly. But that's not the reason why I go out and get Hextall. Not because I think he's got a screw loose, but because I think he plays good hockey. Boghabs, you like Hextall, but not sure he's going to be available. Nothing. We don't know anything about the draft at that point, right? At 28, you don't know if anybody's available. Take a look at when the Canadiens got Ivan Demidov. What was projected? Where was Demidov supposed to go? Top 3? He ended up falling to 5, right into the Canadiens' hands. You don't know what's going to happen at the draft. You don't know the thought process. Look at what the Canadiens did when they drafted Juraj Slafkovsky and Shane Wright and the look on his face, and he fell down to 4th in the draft. To me, that tells me the Canadiens made the right move not drafting him. And so far, it's paid dividends for the Canadiens. We'll see if that continues. But at the end of the day, as I mentioned before, there's no guarantees with the draft. Even if you draft the best player available, he might be the best player draft-wise in terms of points, in terms of skill. But he needs to have a certain profile for you to pick him, right? If you're looking out to get a purely skilled player, you go out and you draft the best player available. But even in that Slafkovsky draft, we all have to admit the Canadiens didn't draft the best player available. They drafted a power forward for organizational need. You need to admit that, right? Because nobody saw the Canadiens drafting Slafkovsky. No one. Everybody was, they're going to take Shane Wright. That didn't materialize. They surprised everybody. Chris Hansen, 8477. Hage is the answer, hopefully. And I think he will be. Okay. Does he bring the physical game that we want? No. But the thing about Hage is very simple. He puts up points. He's very good at creating offense. That will take pressure away from Nick Suzuki. Can he round out his game and become a guy who's more responsible in his own zone, who can work well on the half wall, who can support his defenseman? That's all about coaching and development. You know, in Michigan, he's learning that. That goes without saying. That program, they build complete players. But Mike needs to put on a little bit more weight. So we'll see how that turns around and how that translates when he comes to the Canadiens, most likely later on this season, depending on where the Canadiens are in terms of playoff projection and in terms of where Michigan is vis-a-vis the Final Four, or the Frozen Four, I should say. What does this even mean? Habs need to move up. Habs 28, Buffalo 27. Obi-Wan Kenobi trolling. What is Obi-Wan Kenobi trolling? That's a great fun fact. It is. Good on Jimmy for bringing that up. Victor Maxwell. Calgary is going for the Ruck brothers. What irony if they get both of them. That's going to be a tough ask. I put up a show about the Canadiens trying to get the Ruck brothers, right? At 28. But I think that Liam is projected to go around 20th. Whether or not he falls lower in the draft, who knows? But it's going to be tough for a team to be able to get both those guys at the same time. Can Calgary pull it off? If they do, great. But like a lot of people have said, I said maybe the Canadiens go out and get the Ruck brothers because they produced in Medicine Hat. But a lot of people have said, and rightfully so, the Ruck brothers still need to work on their skating. They're not a finished product just yet. So we'll see what happens. Anyone notice that the tallest men in the draft are all goalies? You know why that is, Vic? I can explain it to you, being a former goalie myself. Now, granted, I am not 6'8", I'm 5'10", but there's a reason behind it. Okay? And this is a trend that started years ago. And it was passed on to guys like Jake Ottinger, Connor Hellebuck, etc. Okay? The whole thing about goalies is very simple. The bigger they are, the more space they take up. The more space they take up, the more they go into their butterfly and cover the net, right? So the idea that a goalie is tall and can cover a lot of the net is fine. And that's the reason why they put him there, because after all, goaltending is no longer about skill in terms of how you're able to stop a puck. It's about percentages. It's about how far out you come in your net and how, your distance from where you are versus where the net is, how you cover your angles and stuff like that. But the thing about goaltenders is that the ability to be able to make a second save and third save, that's been taken out of the equation now for them. That's why goaltending sucks so bad when you take a look up and down, and why the save percentages are so bad in the National Hockey League now. If you remember, even when Carey Price was in net, okay, and you took a look around the National Hockey League at other goaltenders, whether it was Henrik Lundqvist or whether it was Sergei Bobrovsky earlier in his career, or Vasilevsky earlier in his career, or anybody else, the thing about them was very simple. Their save percentages were outrageous, upwards of 915, 920. Those numbers were gaudy and unheard of. And it wasn't because they weren't technically sound, because they were technically sound goaltenders. The reason was because they were able to make saves when the technical aspect of the game was lost on them already, when they had to be spectacular. Look at Jonathan Quick, for example. He's another guy. Technically sound, fantastic down low, and was able to make spectacular saves when he needed to. That part of the game, that flexibility, that foresight, that ability to make that kick save or the glove save when the game was on the line, it's gone. Don't you guys miss that at all when it comes to goaltending anymore? And that's the part that worries me in terms of the trend. But the other reason behind it is because players that are 6'6" and above, okay, or 6'5" and above, they have a hard time finding their center of balance. And that makes their ability to skate much more difficult. So when they start to play the game and they want to play the game, instead of being players, they end up going in net. Why? Because you don't have to skate as much, because your center of balance isn't called into question all the time, and because the position is easier to take on. It's simple for me. If I was 6'8", you're damn right I'd be a goalie. But I'd try to be a goalie who's flexible, a guy who's able to move side to side, and a guy who's able to cover his net well beyond just the ability to be technically sound. That would make me one of the best goalies in the league, bar none. Let's see here. Vog Habs. Does Montreal keep their pick this year or trade it as draft capital? They already have a logjam of prospects. They do. I mean, they have a logjam of prospects, but like everybody says here, right? You can never have enough, right? So if you have 28 and you have to keep them, that's fine. But if you can move 28 in order to get the second line center that you want, along with maybe, let's say you trade away that plus Montembeault plus maybe another first round pick and a low level prospect, then yeah, you go for it. But do they really need to keep the pick? Look, they traded away their pick last year, right, in order to get Dobson. And so I understand that part, okay? But you don't want to start trading away your first round pick every year, even if it is as low as it is. This is a relatively deep draft in terms of what the Canadiens are looking for. So if they don't trade it, that's fine. If they do trade it, to me, that's fine too. I'm not going to overdo it. But one thing that I don't want the Canadiens to do is make it a habit to start trading away their first round picks, because that's going to be detrimental to the organization long term if those first round quality picks aren't there for them to be able to develop and pinch from as the team gets better. Macaron, another victim of Sylvain Lefebvre. Who the hell is Macaron, Roy? Oh, McCarron. McCarron was a forward, not a defenseman. So Sylvain Lefebvre was a defenseman type of guy. If you're talking about Sylvain Lefebvre in terms of AHL head coach, McCarron wasn't there long enough for him to actually kill him. Okay, he was there for a year before the Canadiens called him up. But yeah, McCarron was definitely... See, I remember this draft like it was yesterday, okay, because I was sitting at, I think the restaurant name was Peroni, inside of the Sun Life building, which, by the way, used to be the headquarters of the National Hockey League here in Montreal. And I was sitting with my daughters. I was there with Rick Springhetti and his daughter Olivia, and Rick Springhetti, you know his name from Habscast. And I was sitting at the time. He was working for McKean's magazine, and it was also with James Stepan, who James at the time was writing for Hockey Writers. And so the three of us were there. And we were going back and forth in terms of who the Canadiens should draft. And I forget at what point the Canadiens were drafting in that draft. Let me just take a look for a second. It wasn't so high that it was really all that important, but it wasn't low enough to really um, draw attention to the pick. Hang on as I bring it up. Mike McCarron, it was the 25th overall pick. But the Canadiens back then were drafting for size alone, not really for anything that was overly, you know, um, important. And I remember that year too because the the Oshawa Generals won the Memorial Cup that season, and I was in Quebec City for work when the Oshawa Generals were there. In fact, we were staying at the same hotel, and I got a chance to go watch one of the games live at the Colisée back then. And I got to tell you, despite the fact that the Generals dominated, McCarron wasn't that dominant player. Was he good? Absolutely. But was he a dominant player? Not so much. And that was after the Canadiens had actually drafted him. So I wasn't overly impressed with the pick, although at the time, as the draft was coming down, when we got to 25, McCarron was the name that I called out and said was going to get picked. But, that was because he was the best player available at that point, and the Canadiens were looking for center depth. So I knew for sure that Bergevin was going to try to pick him. But he didn't work out the way we wanted. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Hal Wilkins, why are you yawning? You don't like talking draft? I'm glad you like the cost-off pick. It took me a while to put these picks together because it's not easy, man. When you're looking at hundreds of players down the list and potentially who might get picked, who not get picked, I mean, I looked at 3 different mock drafts from other people, and I looked at the prospective picks, and then I thought, okay, this is what I want here, this is what I want there. What's the profile? It was so hard. I don't envy scouts at all if this is what they do yearly in order to prepare for the draft. Not my cup of tea. I'd rather be behind the bench working with the guys. My priority is being able to sign the talent the Habs need to pay. Yeah, absolutely. But again, the Canadiens only have $11 million of space. Okay. If the Canadiens are going to go out and try to hit a homer for a 2C, they can't handcuff themselves either. So they need to create a little bit of space. Now, I know what everybody's going to say. Yes, Brendan Gallagher is going to come off the books. Yes, next year, Josh Anderson comes off the books. But you want to resign Anderson, even if it's a little bit less money? Is the same old true for Philip Deneau because he's useful? That remains to be seen. But by and large, you have to look at it right now for what it's worth. They're going to get Brendan Gallagher off the books, whether it's by trade or buyout, one way or the other, which is fine, right? But it's also going to carry a little bit of a penalty for the next couple of years for the Canadiens, which again, fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's going to be, I think, 1.75 in year 1, which is this year, and 1.75 in year 2. A far cry from the $6.5 million draft cap hit. So it's going to be $5 million off the cap. No problem. I can live with that. But again, you have to think about next year where the Canadiens also have to re-sign Demidov. That's another thing, right? So let's see what happens. But yeah, you need to sign the players that you need to sign, which again is Demidov. That's number 1. Maxwell, Victor, I hope Zorowski and Pickford don't get traded. Imagine Demi and Zar on the same line in 27-28. Yeah, that's kind of why I have Zorowski on my untouchable list. As in terms of prospects, I have my list of players that are on the Canadiens roster that I think are untouchable, and I have my list of players who are untouchable in terms of being able to move them. That's a whole other show that's coming up next week, by the way. Boston wants Arbor badly. They're not the only team. I think you're wrong with that one. They don't want Arbor. They want Struble. That was what I had heard from everybody last year, including Jimmy Murphy. They wanted Struble. So we'll see whether or not that changes. Everybody wants Arbor. But they want a guy who's able to play more minutes. And I don't think anybody really has that that trust in Arbor being able to play more than 10 or 12 minutes. But we'll see. I mean, we don't want him to play more than that, do we? Joe the Stoop, in Australia, we have anti-siphoning laws where sports of national and cultural importance have priority on free air TV. Oh man, if that was the case, Canada would be in a great place, but it's all about free enterprise, either here or in the States. So that's not going to happen, Joel. But I love the fact that you guys, I can imagine being able to sit there and watch, whether it's cricket or Australian rules football. Oh man, I would love that to be free. But anyway, absolutely hockey. I would trade Arbor Jack if I'm the Habs. He brings a lot of this, a lot to this team that we don't want, that we don't have, and we need more of. I would look more at players like him on the team for forward and deep. Well, we've got one of those in the pipeline in Florian, don't we? So, yeah, we don't have to look too far. You watch the shows but rarely commented. Shame on you, man. I like what you're saying. You should bring more of it. I like your thought process for sure. Absolutely. Agree 1,000%. Arbor, Florian, Habs need guys on the ice. I heard Ekstrom plays with grit as well. Not as much as those two guys. To Marty, let them play, not 2 to 5 minutes. And that's an important point here that we bring up all the time. I bring it up too. I'm tired of the 2 to 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, and benching the guy because the referee sees him the wrong way. I mean, okay, granted, Arbor does take a couple of penalties that maybe he shouldn't take. We can all agree on that. But when you're defending your players on the ice, you shouldn't be punished for that. And I think that's where there has to be a distinction for Marty. And again, I'm not sure that Marty's calling all the shots when it comes to the ice time that's given to defensemen. Because, you know, I've said this before and I'll say it again. I'm not 1,000% sure. But I'm pretty sure that Robida is in his ear and tells him, because Marty delegates a lot. And I think Robida is the guy that needs to be moved. Marty, he will trust whoever's there. And he will give his input and he will let the guy make decisions. If he disagrees, he'll talk to him. But at the end of the day, if Robida goes over to Marty and tells him, I'm not putting Arbor on because he takes too many penalties, because, you know, he chases a little bit, because of this and that, you're not allowing the player to develop. And that's detrimental because he does bring value to the Canadiens roster. Sharks moved their pick from 20 to 27 and got a defenseman in return for trading down 7 spots. Tidy business from the Sharks. Hey, listen, Mike Greer, the work that he's done to rebuild the Sharks in such a short period of time, it's magical. It's very well done. Much like what Kent Hughes has done here along with Jeff Gorton. So you got to give him props because that team is on the upswing. We all know it. And so the Sharks are going to be dangerous. Thanks for reading my comments. Cheers. Whenever they make sense, I will bring them up. And when they could generate conversation, I bring them up because they deserve to be. Sheldon Hughes, the only way Hage gets traded would be for Thomas and Hischier. It would also take much more in prospects and picks for either player. Sheldon, I don't think that Kent Hughes is anywhere near ready to trade a kid like Michael Hage, right? If he's willing to give Michael Hage another year in college, or to not worry about him developing another year in college, it's because he has the patience to allow him to develop, not because he's allowed him to develop for another team to take advantage of. And I think that's where a lot of people are misinterpreting what he's doing here, right? Hage in Michigan is a safe place for him to develop, bar none. Okay. It allows him to get bigger physically. It allows him to develop his game more in terms of having more responsibility. And it allows him to play with his brother, which is something that he wants. So, I don't foresee the Canadiens even remotely trading Michael Hage. I don't care who the player is. I don't care if it's Hischier. I don't care if it's Robert Thomas. It's going to be part of the conversation from the other team, but it's not a starting point for the Canadiens. Kurt, welcome. Lots of fake rumors, and one said Chicago was shopping Anton Frundell for defense. Thoughts? I saw that. I didn't put a lot of credence into it because I don't think Chicago can afford to trade a guy like Frundell, right? They have limited resources as it is. They put so much pressure on Jesus, I can't remember his name. Connor Bedard. There's too many Connors in the league. That's why I'm a little fucked up when it comes to Connor McDavid, Connor Hellebuck, Connor Bedard. It's been messing me up. But um, Bedard has been doing the work all on his own when it comes to the Chicago Blackhawks, and they need to build that team. So you can't take pieces that work and trade them off. Frendell's one of those pieces. So I don't see that. Thanks for agreeing. uh, Sheldon, you agree. No Frendell getting traded, especially for a D. I would agree with that. Deke 1, what are your thoughts about Montreal trading for Dylan Strome out of Washington as a 2C? You can go back and watch my show from a couple of days ago because I talked for 20 minutes about going out and getting Dylan Strome. Strome fits exactly what we need in terms of a 2C. He's skilled, he's got size, he puts up points, and he can take the pressure away from Nick Suzuki. Is he as perfect a fit as Nico Hischier? No, but he will get here for a cheaper price. I foresee that if the Canadiens were able to take a second round pick and a prospect for Dylan Strome, I think Washington's willing to move him for that. If Washington asks for the 28th pick overall, you move him. You make that deal all day, every day. I have no problem with that. But if they ask for more, that's when I step away from the table because I don't really think he's worth all that much. Excuse me, I'm getting parched here. That's what happens when you drink and you talk too much. Just ask Jimmy. It's the whole reason why we started drinking. But yeah, when it comes to Dylan Strome, I'd love to see him in Montreal. Kurt, call me Shilly, but I would trade for Shane Wright and let MSL work his magic. Not a chance. And not because Shane Wright doesn't have the skill set, because Shane Wright doesn't have the character. And that's a big part of the way the Canadiens have built this hockey team. Every player that you look at in the lineup, up and down, when you take a look at how they drafted, how they interview at the draft. If you take a look at the rebuild that's available on Crave, and I think it's on HBO Max, but I'd be remiss to say yes or no. Shane Wright does not have that je ne sais quoi in terms of player character, right? It can't be all about me. And for Wright, that's what it seems like. It's all about him. And the Canadiens have built a culture where it's not about one player, it's about the collective. And that is one of the similarities that the Canadiens have to the Stanley Cup champion Carolina Hurricanes. It's not about one player. Yes, we've got guys that can put up points in Suzuki, in Caulfield, and Slavkovsky. We've got a goaltender that can stop pucks. We've got an elite defenseman and all that good stuff. But the Canadiens play with a hive mind. And that's the part that really impresses me. And it's one of those things that newer coaches like Marty, like Rod Brindamore, like Spencer Carberry, they're bringing into the game. And that's something that is missing. Because if you can play with a hive mind and play as a group, you're going to win, regardless of what your skill set is. So long as your skill adapts to the playing style that your coach is trying to push forward and brings tools to the table, then that's what you need. And I don't see Shane Wright filling in that spot. I would love to trade for Matt Beniers. Beniers is an interesting name, and I wouldn't mind examining that trade either in terms of getting him from Seattle, because Beniers puts up points and he's a skilled forward and he's a guy who's got relatively good size. So I could see that happening. So I could agree with that, Sheldon. It's a good call on your part. I have never really liked Marty. He seems to have favorites, and in the playoffs, he kept the same lines and wouldn't change it when it wasn't working in the ECF against Carolina. He made bad decisions. Wow. Okay. Absolutely, this is where you and I are going to completely disagree, because not that he didn't make changes. I agree with that part. He didn't adapt. But here's the thing about the Montreal Canadiens that everybody's missing here. How many of you expected the Montreal Canadiens to get to the Eastern Conference Final? I'm hearing crickets, because that's the truth. If there's anything that, whether it was this show or any of you originally said, and a lot of you did, you may not be on the show right now, but a lot of you said. Where would we be happy with the development of the Canadiens this year? With two things. They get into the playoffs without having to wait until the last game of the season, and they win a round. Did the Canadiens do that? Yes. They got lucky when they did it by getting past Tampa. 9 shots on goal in a game 7, unheard of. They got lucky. Against Buffalo, two very similar teams. It could have gone either way. Both teams got 0 in terms of production from their top forwards. Granted, okay? They got more from their middle 6. Buffalo had a better middle 6 than Montreal. But what Buffalo didn't get was the goaltending of Jakub Dobeš. That was the difference in that series as well. Okay? So the Canadiens got there because they got there. Because they beat teams that they were better than. Okay? Even if you're looking at the Tampa Bay Lightning. Even if you're looking at Buffalo. I think the Canadiens were better structured than those two. But then in the Eastern Conference Final, they hit a wall against a team that has been together for years. And if there's one thing about the Carolina Hurricanes, you look at Vegas. Vegas went through the exact same thing. Vegas is a very good hockey team with better pieces than Montreal in terms of size and skill and all that good stuff. What happened to Vegas? The exact same thing. Why? Because the Carolina Hurricanes play a collective game. From line 1 to line 4, they all push the same way. There's no slack in their forecheck. There's no slack in their defensive coverage. And they were getting quality goaltending. Okay? That's why those teams lost. Okay? Whether it's Montreal or otherwise. And if you're basing your entire premise of what Marty St. Louis can or cannot do on the Eastern Conference Final, you need to go back and take a look at what he's done since the day he walked through the door in Montreal. He's the guy that developed Cole Caulfield. He's the guy that's developing Lane Hudson. He's the guy that's helping Nick Suzuki. And you're going to shit on him because he didn't make decisions? I'm not saying he's not going to get better. He is going to get better as a head coach. No doubt about it, because he's done it year after year after year. He may not be the ideal guy, but do you want another fucking retread in this city who's going to take this team and turn it into a dump and chase model? No. You want a guy who's going to move forward, learning from the mistakes that he's made year after year. And if there's one thing that Marty's done, is that. Can you fault the guy for what he did this year? Absolutely. You could say, yes, he wasn't prepared to coach that level of hockey against a team with that acumen. No doubt about it. Is he going to be ready next year? You're damn right he is. Because if there's one thing that I know about Marty St. Louis, and everybody who knows Marty has said this, he learns from what he's gone through. He learned as a player, being a smaller guy, he learned how to be better and how to get the best out of himself in order to be the best player available on there. And it got him to the Hall of Fame and it got him on the Stanley Cup. And I have no doubt that he's going to do the same thing as a coach because he wants to succeed and he wants to bring a Stanley Cup to Montreal the same way Hughes and Gordon want to do it. And you know what? I think Montreal is going to be able to do it. Marty St. Louis be on the bench because he's adaptable. He learns. Can he have a better support cast behind him? No doubt. I like Trevor Letowski. I don't like Stefan Robida. I don't think he brings what the Canadiens need in terms of defensive awareness, right? But I don't think Marty is a shit for brains coach. Is that what you want here? Because that's not what I want. You've got a guy who's got a brain, who's very smart when it comes to the game of hockey, and who learns and adapts year after year after year. As much as the players are developing on the ice, the coaching staff and Marty are developing behind the bench. And that's not a bad thing to happen. It's a very good sign. So let's leave it as it is. Don't blame Marty for what happened in the ACF. He just ran into a better team. He didn't make bad decisions. Youngest team in the National Hockey League, like Chris says here. I agree with him 1,000%. This team has to learn. They need to go through the growing pains. They went through round 1 last year against Washington and hurt, right? They knew they wanted to go further. They didn't have the gas in the tank, right? This year, what has happened with the Canadiens? They went further, developed, became better. That's what we want. You've still got young players that were getting their first taste of playoff experience. Guys like Jakub Dobeš. Loved what he did in terms of his rookie season and what he learned in the playoffs. Okay. More experience for guys like Demidov and Caulfield and Suzuki. And the list goes on and on. Okay. More experience for Marty St. Louis. It goes hand in hand. He's going to learn. He's going to be better. Sheldon, thank you about the Habs season. Nothing wrong with being beaten in the ECTF by the team that wins in the Stanley Cup final. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too, Joe. And Sheldon, that's my point. Marty's still growing as a coach. I've met Marty, okay? If you go back a few shows ago where I do my assessment of Marty, that picture of him and me, it's a modification of a picture that I actually have, okay? Years ago when I was running the D-Skate program, I ran into Marty, and this is a pretty funny story because when I was working for the Hawkesbury Hawks, Marty, of course, is an alumni of the Hawks. He played for them for one season before going to Vermont, along with Eric Perrin. Both of them were on the Hawks. And the Hawks at the time were trying to get the Fred Page Cup, which now is the Centennial Cup, played by, other teams. In terms of, the Fred Page was more of a regional championship instead of a national championship. Now it's the Centennial Cup is a national championship. But because of that, I'd gotten in touch with Marty through the NHLPA in order to be able to get his, blessing in terms of why Hawkesbury should be a team that is in consideration for the Fred Page Cup. And he did that beautifully. Love the guy for it. But then we're at the Delta on Dixie Road in Mississauga, Ontario. And I'm downstairs with the kids and the parents. We were downstairs having a drink and just having a discussion, not with the kids, but with the parents. The kids were just there, at another table. But as we're sitting there, I look up and I see Marty at the bar sitting there. And so Marty and I had gone back and forth on emails multiple times. So I had his email address and I sent him an email. And I just joked. I said, if you look up from the bar and you see the bald guy in glasses in front of you, that's me. And you would think, it's a joke, whatever. If he comes over, he comes over. But no, right away, he got up, he came over, shook my hand, introduced himself. I introduced him to my partner at the time, Stephen Hindle. We talked a little bit about, D-Skate and what we do for the kids, and he loved it. We talked about he was there because his boys were in a tournament. We talked about that as well. And then we had a nice little 10-minute conversation about the game. Okay. I just took advantage of it because it's Marty St. Louis, right? And we talked about the game and the difference between when he started and when he finished. He could have gone on for hours about how the game had changed just during his time in the league and how he had to adapt. So could you imagine him having that same conversation as a coach? And that's why we have to be patient. Okay. If we, in the middle of this rebuild, if you go out and you go and get the wrong coach for the wrong set of players, what happens? You blow everything up that's been built up until this point. I'm not ready to take that chance. Okay. I'm not ready to go out and take a guy and bring him in here and say, you know what? Marty has had a winning record for the last couple of years, got the Canadiens into the playoffs for the first time since 2021. And, what has he done? Well, we're going to push him out the door and get another guy in here to do what? Develop what? Let me explain something to you that you may already know, but don't. That makes no sense. But let me explain something to you that you may already know, but don't realize that you do. Head coaches don't develop squat. Okay. It's the grunt workers, the Letowskis, to an extent the Robida, although I don't think he has very much to bring to the table anymore. Adam Nicholas. There's other guys in the Canadiens organization that work with players on the ice in Brossard when they're there. Personally, I've seen Sebastian Bordeleau work with them in the summer. I've seen Roman Hamrlik from the Czech Republic come in and work with them. The list goes on. So there are people that come in and work with guys. It's not just about the coaching staff. And what they do through those guys is they learn different philosophies, whether it's Adam Nicholas and the way you should train on the ice and the drills you should do to make your skill set better, or whether it's Trevor Letowski during the season teaching you different ways to play offensively, or whether it's, guys like Stefan Robida teaching you different defensive awareness drills, anything to make you better. The list goes on and on and on. The one-on-ones that Marty does with players are unique because being able to learn from a Hall of Fame player like that, the way he thinks the game, will make any player better. Doesn't matter who you are. But the thing about Marty is that he delegates a lot and then he reels things in. And that's a unique trait to have in the NHL. Would you rather have Mike Babcock as a head coach? Haven't even talked about that, have we? But yeah, that's another situation for another day, right? But think about it for a minute. Joel Quenneville's a good coach. All right. He's a retread. Peter DeBoer, don't like him very much for what he said about Jake Ottinger, but he's a good coach. Okay, another retread. The thing about the game of hockey is that over time it progresses and it develops into something different. And your coaches have to have the ability to adapt. I have to admit, DeBoer, Quenneville, all these guys that I mentioned, they have that ability because their hockey acumen is high enough, their IQ is high enough. Okay, Marty has that IQ, so give him a chance. Absolutely. I do agree that it was impressive for the Habs to get to the ECF, and I was surprised that they got there. I just believe he made wrong decisions. Yeah, and wrong decisions aren't wrong because your thinking is wrong. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. Absolutely. It's not that the coach's thinking is wrong. It's that like any other situation, right? If you as a player, and I'm going to use this as a hypothetical here, but let's say you take yourself as a player and you're developing your skill set to be an offensive player who's able to dangle, has a relatively good wrist shot, and has good vision on the ice. Okay. And I would could take you and drop you into a situation where you needed to be a hard forechecker and finish body checks. Would you be prepared for that? We know the answer to that question. It's no, right? You'd have to develop your skill to be at that level. That doesn't just apply to players, it applies to coaches, right? If you look at me when I was a coach back when I first started coaching in 2005, or before that, even 2003, I think it was, and you look at me now as a coach over 20 some odd years, my thought process is totally different, right? I do not coach the same way anymore. I used to be a lot more verbal on the bench. I used to yell out instructions to guys on the ice. Would they listen? Who the hell knows? But I would do that. Over the years, though, I stopped doing that and I waited till guys got to the bench and I spoke to them when they came there, right? Or I delegated to my assistants. I would walk over to an assistant and I would say, you know what? This is what I saw. Maybe have a talk with such and such player. I changed the way I did things. I changed the way I taught. I also changed the way I practice with players. And that's what coaches do over time. It's not just the guys on the ice that learn, it's the coaches themselves, right? You tend to deal with different players. You learn how to adapt to the players that you have and you treat them differently, right? I ended up with kids. I've coached kids with autism. Okay. I've coached kids with learning disabilities and I've taught them how to play the game because I've adapted my way of coaching to their ability to absorb information. It's as simple as that. And the same holds true for Marty. Every player on the roster, from number 1 to number 23, they all have different ways of learning the game. Some are the same, some are different. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to adapt to every player that you have, understand their mentality, and teach them what you want them to learn. It's easy to put it on the board. Some guys can interpret the board really quick, but you've always got players that will stand there and come over to you and say, what did you mean by this? Doesn't matter if you're pro, doesn't matter if you're not. Some of them will shut their mouths and back off and wait for the drill to happen to understand what the coach was talking about. Others won't have the problem to walk up to the coach and ask him the question. And the same holds true for coaches, right? They'll go through a situation, and you know what'll happen? Over the summer, Marty St. Louis will have a beer with John Cooper and say, John, this happened to me. How would you adapt to that? You would talk to John Tortorella. Torts, this happened. How would you adapt to that? You take other coaches' situational play, you bring it into yours, you think about it, and you think about what you had in front of you, and you say, okay, you know what? Next time I'm going to do that. That's how coaches get better, including yours truly. Yeah, you know what? I don't. The thing about Brendan Gallagher here, Kurt, is I love Gally. Don't get me wrong, and I certainly don't want to see him leave the Canadiens. Okay, we know he's going to. We know he wasn't happy being benched for so long. I get it, but I think that Gally doesn't have the tools anymore to be as effective as he used to be. Emotionally, he could bring a kick in the ass to the team, and he did that against Buffalo. But against Carolina, he doesn't have the size, he doesn't have the speed to be able to be effective. Would he have given the team a boost for maybe a period or two? Sure. But I don't know how much Gally can actually change the game anymore. And so I agree with you. We weren't winning that game anyway. The Canadiens just, number one, they were beaten to death. And number two, Carolina was just too complete a team. Marty was coaching against elite coaches, and he will learn from this experience, just like the players. Exactly what I'm saying, Sheldon. Sean Dinsmore. I stumbled across this Habs channel. This guy is the voice of reason, knows his Habs hockey. Refreshing. Thank you very much, Sean, and welcome to the channel, by the way. Mr. Montrealistic. If Habs can't get a 2C, Mason Marchment would be some nice grit to add. You know what? That's a name I came across a couple of times, Mr. Montrealistic. Welcome to the channel too, by the way. And you're not wrong. I wouldn't mind seeing Mason Marchment in the Canadiens uniform too. And like you said, you can't put all your eggs in one basket. If the Canadiens can't get a 2C, then your priority is 2C, right-hand D, grit. And so right-hand D you may be able to get. And there's a couple of options out there. But if you don't, you still have David Reinbacher coming down. So you've got a bit of an option. But in terms of that grit, Mason Marchment would be a nice add. That's a great perspective by you. Kurt, I think that rebuild is a year ahead of schedule. Love getting playoff experience, but I'm not ready to trade our assets yet. And that's the point here. In my mind, Kurt, this year was a bonus, okay? And there were a lot of people on this channel, and one guy who's no longer on this channel, who used to be in the chat all the time, by the name of Joe, who I had to get rid of because he was so adamant about hating Marty St. Louis that I just couldn't do it anymore, right? It was unfair. So, but here's the thing. In talking about Joe and all that, I love the part about getting playoff experience too. But the thing about it is, I think the Canadiens are going to be competitive, not next year, but the year after that. So 2 years down the road. And that was my target from the beginning of this year. I said Montreal wouldn't be a contender this year or next, but the year after. And of course, I got hit for it, but that's the target for me. Not 26, 27, but 27, 28. That's where I start assessing where the Canadiens should be. Not just on the ice, but behind the bench. Where I say, you know what, guys? You need to make this adjustment. You need to do this. I'll be harder on them. Don't get me wrong. But in my mind, I've already set the schedule in my head. And I did it when they first started the rebuild. They brought Marty St. Louis in, I think it was November 2021. And that's when they announced, all the changes, right? Actually, November, I think, was when they brought in Kent Hughes, but I can't remember the dates exactly. But when they brought in Kent Hughes, that is where I said, you know what? Okay, here we go. Rebuild, that's what they're talking about. They went out and they got a GM to fit that rebuild. Give them 6 years, okay? And that's what I'm doing. 6 years for the rebuild to be complete. That doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, but just the rebuild portion is going to be complete. They're going to have refilled the stock down on the farm. The NHL roster is going to be complete in terms of how they want the team to look. And then you can build and move forward. The rebuild's done. And then you're able to say, okay, now it's time for us to become the Carolina Hurricanes, as an example, a team. Everybody on this roster is pushing in the same direction. Let's go. And at that point, I think we're all going to be sitting there with our jaws dropped and saying, I didn't envision this for the Montreal Canadiens. I didn't think Marty had it in him. I didn't think this team had it in him. And that's the part that we are going to enjoy the most. And I have every belief that that's going to happen. But we still need to be patient. The job's not done yet. Whether it's the coaching staff or otherwise, there's still work to be done. Jobs to do. I understand I'm autistic as well, and I know it can be hard to learn, and people at times can learn differently. I understand and have compassion for those people, so it can be hard. Hey, I wasn't trying to target anything. I'm just saying, I've had kids with ADHD, autistic, this is a fun story and it's not hockey related. Okay. Years ago, I was coaching midget baseball and I had a young kid by Sebastian who was on my team who was autistic, and his mom basically put him on the team because he just wanted to be on the field. There's no kid that should go out and play baseball and just be on the field. They should always be there to learn, whether you're playing midget or otherwise. And there were other kids that I helped along the way. I taught one kid how to not worry about swinging for the fences and, just making contact. And if he makes good contact because of his size, the ball's going to go. That worked. But with Sebastian, it was different. And with him, it was two things. I taught him how to hit, which was great because I taught him how to time his swing versus the trigger point, and you because that's how autistic kids learn is you find their trigger and you use it. And for him, it was all about specific points. He was always focusing on one specific thing. And so I taught him to do that with pitchers, and he learned how to hit each individual one. Got a couple of hits. In one game, he got to third base, and I noticed something about the pitcher. Coming out of his full windup, he would step off the rubber. So I asked Sebastian, what's the pitcher doing that you don't like? And he looks and he says, he's stepping off the rubber before he throws his pitch. I said, yeah, and he's doing that really early, right? He says, yeah. So I asked him, do you think you could steal home? Now that point where that foot would come off the rubber, that's the trigger. And so he looks at me, he goes, yeah, I think I could do it. I said, okay, let's make sure the next pitch he does it again. And the pitch after that, take off. He's like, okay. That's exactly what he did. And Sebastian stole home. And his mother came into the dugout after the game. We lost. Didn't matter. His mother came into the dugout after the game and jumped on me, hugging me, crying, because she had never seen her son do something like that before. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. It's all about learning when it comes to coaching and playing and anything. And it doesn't matter if you're 12 or 22 or 15 or 55. There's always something new to learn in the game of hockey. Doesn't matter what it is, right? There's always a new quirk, a new strategy, a new way of doing things. And the thing about being anywhere in the league is being adaptable. That's the way it goes. I wouldn't mind Marchman at the right price. I agree. I remember Joe. He's hard to forget. Next level hockey, Ilya Morozov. I brought him up, but my preference in terms of that first pick is Jack Hextall. Festivus. Hey, coach, would you be interested in a PLD? What is a PLD? Or what would you be willing to give up? PLD. What is a PLD? Stop writing in code, Festivus. You're trying to confuse the piss out of me. Let me see here. What is a PLD? Pierre-Luc Dubois. Is that what that is? No fucking way. No. Stop. Time out. Where are we going here? No. Stop talking about Pierre-Luc Dubois. Okay? And there's a very specific reason for that. Twice now, he's used the Montreal Canadiens to leverage a better contract from other teams. He's come out and said publicly that he wants to play in Montreal, and then he gives Montreal the screw you. Not a chance. There's a guy whose character I will never like. Not a chance. And not for the money he's worth. No. Screw that. Yeah, I got it, absolutely. Pierre-Luc Dubois. No. Not a chance, guys. No. And I'm not giving up shit for him. How's that? No. Absolutely. I saw your video last night about the top 5 US fades. You go for it if you were Montreal, and I believe Jenner's a good fit. Just injury history, and need to hope that he could stay healthy, but good leader in the room. And that was my point in all of that. I understand that he's injury prone, right? But keep in mind also that Boone Jenner is what Nick Suzuki is for the Montreal Canadiens in terms of the attention that he got in Columbus. If he's a secondary center, one, I don't think he gets as many of those hard matchups. And two, I could think he could be more productive than he was in Columbus. That's why I was looking at Boone Jenner. And to be honest, the UFAs, the market, this thin. Like there's really nothing there, but it is what it is. Yeah. $8 million cap hit means for me. Okay. Because Pierre-Luc Dubois' character isn't something I want on this team. Fool me once, that's on me. Fool me twice, no, not happening. 2 times, Pierre-Luc Dubois used Montreal as leverage to get a better contract. See you later. Absolutely. We want players with very high character. That's all Montreal wants. And that's the way it should be. I mean, we are the best hockey market in the world. That's not to insult anybody else, but it's just the truth. Inner top. Thoughts on the rumor that Gallagher could fetch a Rossi from Vancouver? Good Lord. Size worries me, but talent's good. You know what? If we could get Rossi from Vancouver, that's fine. But again, he's not the 2C that we want. At that point, you're selling. And let me see something for a second. As I bring this up, bear with me, guys. Okay, Marco Rossi, 22 points in 33 games. I take it he was injured. But here's the number that really bugs me when it comes to Marco Rossi. It's minus 20. I know it's the Canucks. I know the Canucks were crap, but still, minus 20. Okay, he had 22 points and he was minus 20. Listen, I know he's got skill. You're right, but you're talking about a guy who's 5'9" and 182 pounds. He's not a world beater. He's not the guy who's going to break things open along the half wall. He doesn't have the size that you need to play at center. That's not what we're looking for. Okay? And what's his contract like? Let's see that part too. Hang on. As we do that part, Rossi, let's see here. Come on, hurry up. I hate my iPad because it's slow. $5 million. The number's okay, right? When does this contract expire is the question. It expires in 2028. And he's an RFA with arbitration rights at that point. So think forward for a minute here, okay? Basically, you're going to get net, you're going to get $1.5 million off the cap. You're going to get a 2C that you don't really need because you want somebody with a little bit more size, right? And you're going to get a guy who you're going to have to qualify in a couple of years. And if you qualify him, you're going to have to do it at about $6 million. Are you prepared to do that? No. Right? At this point, if you're going to pay a guy who gets you 22 points in a season, $5 million, he better bring more to the table than that, especially if his number's at minus 20. He's not your second line center, guys. Okay? We got more points out of Oliver Kapanen, and he's cheaper. So no thanks. Katie, speaking of guys with questionable character, do you think the Habs should relook at Shane Wright? I talked about that earlier, Katie. The answer to that is a definite no. Okay, it did come up before. And yes, it is a character issue because he's a bit of a dumbass. But, you know, and he doesn't yeah, definitely. Kurt, there it is. It did, Katie, and it was a hard no. Always a hard no when it comes to that. So, guys, we have to wind this one down a little bit as we're coming down to the 10 o'clock hour, and I'm running out of gas and voice too. But is there a specific question that you want to ask me? Do I think going after Beniers is worth the risk? Absolutely, because Beniers is the type of guy who can produce. I mentioned it before in your top. I don't know if you got here late, but definitely a guy that I would go after. Somebody had brought it up before. I'd be remiss if I remember who it was as I go up here. Where are you? Damn it. Manny Beniers. It was Sheldon that brought it up. Absolutely. I don't want us to go after another project in McTavish as we did for Doc. Rossi does follow the project, and same for Freddie. We are far ahead of that timeline. I don't see Mason McTavish, though, as a project per se, because I know he's got to learn how to skate. He's not as quick a skater as you might want, but if we're willing to go out and get somebody like a Ryan O'Reilly, for example, and okay, that like people talked about, what would be so different in getting a younger version of that in Mason McTavish, other than the fact that McTavish still has a little bit of development to do? I don't have a problem with that, definitely, but Rossi's small, and I don't want another small center, right? We want to get away from that. You want a center with a little bit of size, a little bit of grit, a little bit of skill, a little bit of hockey IQ. And Rossi, for me, just doesn't bring that. So he would not be the 2C that I would target for sure. So I guess that will bring us to the end of our show. Joe, you're absolutely welcome. I love doing this, guys. I love this conversation. And I love that the best part about all this, guys, isn't just the conversation. It's the quality of it, right? Because your questions are poignant, they're specific. And the thing is, you're willing to listen. And that's the key point that I tell everybody that comes to this channel, right? It's not about being the smartest guy in the room. I could tell you I know my hockey and I've been doing it for 25 years, right? But I'm never going to be the smartest guy in the room because there's always but somebody smarter. So bye Joe, the one that got banned. You guys are making me laugh now. But here's the fun part about this, okay? We all have a blast here, right? We talk, we laugh, we giggle, we discuss, and we're welcoming. And that's the community I want to build. Thank you all for listening in. I appreciate it 1,000%. Let's make sure we keep the channel growing. If you haven't subscribed already, do it. Hit the like button on the video afterwards as well. And guys, like I always say, make sure you do this because in life and in hockey, it's always important. Keep your skates down, stick on the ice.